Okay.
Hi, welcome back to Module 4, Monitoring and Assessing Progress. Tom, I'm so glad you could be here with us again for more conversation. Today, we're going to be talking, we'll let them edit that. Today, we're going to be talking about a little bit of an overview and the process and purpose of organizational and individual goal setting.
Yeah, for some reason, we tend to think that there's a huge difference in the way people act and the way organizations act and the kinds of goals people should have and the kind of goals organizations should have and the way that we should track the progress of an individual versus the way we should track the progress of an organization and achieving its goals. And really, that's not the case. Today we're going to talk about the similarities between the two and what that can teach us about how we move forward with assessing the progress and learning of our students in much the same way that we assess the progress of our organization and the goals that we're working towards.
Fantastic. So I know that we're going to be talking about setting goals and objectives, and we'd like everyone to go ahead and take a moment to review your organizational goals that you created in Module 1. And as you review those organizational goals, think about how you will measure your progress and success. And what does this have to do with student learning? So go ahead, pause the video, and take a moment to do that reflection, and we'll come back and continue the discussion. Great, welcome back. So we're talking about setting goals and objectives. Tom, jump in.
Yeah. So this is a really important topic and one that is very close to my own heart, both as an organizational leader and as an educator. So when it comes to our organization, who gets to determine what the goals of our organization are? Is it just the founders of the organization? Do we invite others to have a voice in helping us determine what those goals are? And I think in most conversations that you have on this topic, what the conclusion that people will reach is, well, it's the stakeholders. Well, who has a stake in this? It's the people that bear long-term responsibility for what those choices are, right? So now let's look at personal learning goals. Who gets to determine what the students learn, what their goals are? And this is one where if we say, well, it's the stakeholders, who owns the long-term consequences of the personal learning goals? The only person that holds long-term consequences is the student themselves. Everyone else, my consequences end at the end of the school year, maybe within 2-3 years, right? In terms of me bearing any responsibility for those actions, those choices, those learning objectives. But the student now has to live with the consequences of those choices in perpetuity for the rest of their life, right? So as educators, and this was all the rage when I was kind of in the end of my term as a traditional classroom teacher, everyone said you have to put your learning objectives on the whiteboard in the front of the classroom, write them up there for the students. And I thought, that is silly. Yes, I may have design objectives. I may have goals that I used to shape my planning for putting together this lesson. But every single student that walks into my classroom is going to have different goals and objectives for why they are present in my classroom on that day. And I would guess that maybe 25 to 50% of them had anything to do with the lesson that I had planned, right? So we have to take this into consideration when we try to superimpose goals on students. Do they internalize them? No. And if they don't internalize them, Are they actively going to work toward them? And the answer is no, they're not going to. The same way that when some outsider tries to come in and tell us what our organizational goals should be, we push back on that, and rightly so. We say, who do you think you are that you get to tell me what my like I founded this organization, I started this school. You don't get to come in and tell me why I started the school. It's my why, it's my reason. It's the same way for students, and we've got to learn to respect them as such. Now, I want to put a couple warnings on this as we start this conversation about assessment, both assessing progress and assessing outcomes. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, the first thing is I want to have a conversation about the difference between goals versus systems. And the reason is, a goal has a terminus. It has a terminal end. It has a point where you go, yes, my goal is accomplished. I'm done. And you have to set a new goal. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, except that now you have to constantly reevaluate, is this getting me to where I want to be? Here I worked on this goal, and what happens when you lose the motivation to accomplish that goal? Well, you stop working on the goal. Now, that's okay. Just understand what's going on and realign the goals. Okay. And that applies to students. It applies to organizations and systems, or in institutions as well. Systems, on the other hand, don't have an end, right? They may be a means to the end, but we keep moving because it's describing a state of being. And what I mean by that is, and I'm going to put this in academic terms for us, right? If I am a sixth grader and I'm using a particular online learning tool, and I say, I want to accomplish, or I want to complete the sixth grade math program or math level in this math online learning tool, that's a goal that I might set for myself. And if I backwards design that a little bit, very useful approach, now I know how much I need to do for myself each day to be able to accomplish this goal. And the flip side to that is, now if I accomplish the goal or don't accomplish the goal, I use that as a way to judge myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that can bring with it some unhealthy side effects in terms of learning. Okay. It can cause me, like, goals are kind of based on a fixed mindset approach. I know that seems counterintuitive, but they kind of are. All right. The inverse, or the alternative approach to this, is if I use a system, my system is a statement of who I am. I am a math learner. Okay. So now, if I say, well, as a math learner, what does someone who is a math learner do? The day-to-day actions may not actually be different, but the way I'm framing it changes my mindset. Well, someone who is a math learner spends time learning math every day. Maybe that's 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I don't know. However much you decide, a math learner is going to spend time learning math every day. That's a system. Do I ever accomplish that system? Is that system ever over? Have I ever reached the terminus of being that math learner? No, never, right? I may ultimately decide that I desire different things and I no longer wish to see myself as a math learner, and then I can redirect my systems or course correct my system. But it also doesn't bring with it an essence of failure, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if I don't learn math every day? Well, then I jump back into my system, right? Okay, so what's my system? This is my process. This is what I'm going to do to follow my system. I'm a math learner. A math learner learns math every day. I missed a day. Well, then I wasn't being a math learner that day. Well, I am a math learner. So now I'm going to jump in and I'm going to restart that system. And so it's a different mindset approach to goal setting that tends to bring with it a little bit less judgment, especially now. My background is also in business management. I worked in business management for a long time before I worked in education. And managers will tell you, you measure what matters.
Mm.
And then because you measure it, people will do it. Well, maybe not so much. we're going to talk about a few things that how measurement can actually hinder education, or at least hinder learning, that hopefully will then reframe the way we talk about goal setting and assessing progress when it comes to our goals.
Fantastic. I am so excited to learn more about this. Oh, did I go one too far?
No, that's just right. That's just right.
Okay.
So the first thing I want to talk about is Goodhart's law. Goodhart's law, I won't give the full background on this, but it comes from an economic concept, another subject that's close to my heart. But the idea is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. When we talk about education, measuring success, what do we use to measure success? Well, we think about test scores. We think about grades. And we tend to think that those things measure our success. Well, if we say that's the measure, but we convey through our words, actions, incentives that we put into place to the kids that these should be their target, that they should be targeting a certain grade, that they should be targeting a certain score on their test, then it ceases to be a good measure. An example that I have, and I don't know if this will show up because of the background, but if I say that everything should be 1 foot, and I want to measure things that they're all going to be 1 foot, well, I can just redefine 1 foot and what that is, because that was my goal, right? My goal was to make everything 1 foot. And so I just redefine what it means for something to be a foot, and now everything is a foot, and I've achieved full success, right?
Right.
Except that nothing is actually a foot. And when it comes to education, no learning has actually taken place. I will tell you, I've had students in classes who have done all of the work, they jumped through all the hoops, they did the project, and at the end of the semester, they will say, I have no idea what we did in this class. What a stinging indictment, not just of my teaching approach, but of my assessment approach as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
They got the good grade. They did the work that I asked them to do. Did the work result in learning? And if the work did not result in learning, did it do its job, right?
Right.
But they got the grade, right? And so as we talk about this, maybe a target is not the best way of looking at learning objectives. And rather than having a goal in mind, or a destination, or a terminus, like we talked about in goals versus systems, maybe our approach should be more focused on the process of learning that we're going through, rather than hitting a specific target or objective. I'll give you one more example from this before we jump ahead to the next law. And that is with my own son. Now, I'm not going to give you too much detail. Just know that he's using a particular online learning tool for one of his courses in his school right now, and he feels tremendous personal pride when he moves from one level to the next level to the next level. Now, we're not putting pressure on him to accomplish that, except that maybe the first few times he did it, we celebrated with him so much. And so now he derives a tremendous sense of pride from that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, even he just wants to do that online learning tool all the time, so that he can memorize the answers long enough to get them right to move to the next level. Is he actually internalizing those lessons? No, he's not. Right. And we've talked about this in previous modules, the idea of, are you smarter than a fifth grader? Well, no, we've helped people put things into short-term memory in order to pass a test, to pass a grade, but those things don't serve them in the long term, so they don't remember them, right? As we're looking at goal setting and assessment, this is a critical piece to understand, is that we don't want to focus too heavily on measures of progress because those measures then get conveyed as targets, at which point they cease to be effective measures. All right, let's jump into the next one. This one is a little bit more complex. This is Campbell's law. The more any quantitative social indicator in an academic setting, read that as grades, is used for social decision making, read that college applications, job applications, honor society programs, right? The more subject it will be to corruption pressures, and the more apt it will be to distort and corrupt the social process it is intended to monitor. Ooh, the more pressure we put on grades and SAT scores and all of these other things to be used as decision-making indicators for people's entire lives, the less effectively they communicate whether they've actually measured what they are intended to measure. They no longer communicate to us that the student has learned or achieved anything that we actually care about. In fact, I believe it was just this week, the CEO of a major tech company came out and said, we no longer look at student transcripts, high school, college, anything, because they are meaningless. They don't tell us anything about this person's ability to solve problems creatively. So they don't look at them anymore. So then why are we using those things to continue to assess student progress? It's ineffective, it's counterproductive, and it creates a lot of emotional harm and baggage that's driving a lot of today's student mental health crisis. So what are we doing? How can we approach this differently? And what can we do in the micro school space to be really innovative in how we try different approaches to both creating student assessment, helping students create effective learning goals or systems, measure how they're doing so that we can communicate that to parents. And also, can we internalize this as an organization? Can we use these ideas to make better decisions within our organization and how we operate at that level as well?
So let's get into a little more of the nitty gritty.
Right. And this is an area, I just put a couple basic things on here. The idea of formative assessment versus summative assessment. Formative assessment is instant feedback and instruction. It's constantly going on. This is what you see usually in like sports coaching, right? Hey, we're going to run the drill. We're going to run the drill. We're going to run the drill. Do it again, do it again, do it again. And I hate to do anything that would kind of reinforce the drill and kill mentality in an academic environment, because it's not the drill and kill that works. It's the instant feedback, not of you did it wrong, you did it wrong, you did it wrong, but it didn't work. How can we do this differently? It didn't work. How can we do this differently? This is the process that we often talk about in terms of failure, right?
Mm-hmm.
But these are like micro failures. These aren't major. This isn't failing a make it or break it test. This is, I'm working on a learning program online and I answered a math question and I accidentally reversed the numerator and the denominator when I did this activity. Well, a micro formative feedback is going to let me know, and it'll probably say, oops, looks like something went wrong, right? They usually try to use very simple language to try to soften the blow. To me, I don't know that softening the blow is necessarily all that critical. The point is, there was a mistake made. Can we try it again? What can we learn from the mistake itself? And if we can reframe this as a learning opportunity rather than you did wrong, right? Now it helps students learn more effectively. A lot of your online learning tools are going to have formative feedback built right into those programs. I know, Lorian, you've worked with a lot of online learning tools. Have you seen how some of these will give instant feedback and how students respond to that?
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because I'm thinking very specifically of a program that one of my students is using currently. And it has a great response to errors. It happens to be a math program, and this student is using it for geometry. So fairly complex problems that they're solving. And instead of just saying you got it wrong or try again, it gives slightly nuanced clues as to what they should look at. Again, what you were talking about of like, oh, make sure you're paying attention to your exponents, or make sure you're paying attention to rounding, make sure you're paying attention to decimal place, so that they have some clue about where to look, and they're not feeling that stress of I have to do the whole problem over again, but rather I've got this error that I need to look at. So it creates that feedback loop of take a closer look without creating the stress and maybe hopelessness of you've got to do the whole thing again and you're just wrong. And it actually gives, I believe, 2 or 3 attempts before it has you just go to an explanation. At any point in time, the student can choose the explanation, but it gives you 3 or so attempts to kind of figure out, can I readdress this problem before I look at an explanation for it?
Right. I love that example. And a lot of these programs will often identify where the problem is, but not necessarily tell the learner what is the problem. And there's a lot that we as educators can learn from this, and giving feedback on writing samples, giving feedback, and even behavioral feedback when it needs to happen from time to time, right? Instead of saying, you did this wrong, quickly asking, did that turn out the way you wanted it to turn out? Now the feedback becomes reflexive. Oh, did I do what I wanted to do? No. If not, why not? Now, how can I learn from this instead? Okay. That's the idea of formative feedback. Another approach to this is summative feedback. And this is more what most of us are familiar with. This is the basis for state testing, for, midterm exams and semester exams. And that is the idea of summative assessments, which it's right there in the name, summative. Do you remember the sum of this information? And it says it tracks mastery and recall, more so on the recall side than the mastery. Excuse me. However, there can be a correlation between recall and mastery. It doesn't necessarily, it's not a one-to-one correlation, but there can be a correlation, right? And I don't want to sit here and say formative assessment is good, summative assessment is bad, because that's not the case. There is a time and a place for each one of them. But we also have to understand that summative assessment, or at least the way we approach it, generally speaking, is you took the test and the test tells me whether you did bad or whether you know the stuff or not. And like, that's it. You don't get a chance to do anything over. You don't get a chance to fix anything. And I don't give you feedback on which questions you got right, which questions you got wrong. Like, we're not using that to inform education. That's really a not very effective way to use any kind of feedback, because we're not feeding it back into the learning, right? It's just an assessment tool at that point in time. And if it's just an assessment tool, man, here come Goodhart's law and Campbell's law to tell us all of the things that are wrong with that kind of approach to assessment.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to remember that there are different ways to execute these types of assessments as well. So there's a close-ended summative assessment where you have the answers in mind that you are looking for. You're looking for that summation of learning, very specifically to content you're looking for. And there's also a way to do that in an open-ended fashion where you ask, tell me what you know about this subject. And your learner may have come away with different points of importance, but you may find that they really have mastered the topic, even though they've chosen to highlight some different areas, or they've looked at it from a different perspective. And when you ask open-ended questions, you create that possibility to find out what they actually know on the topic, versus closed-ended questions where you're looking for a specific piece of content to be offered up as proof of learning.
Right, exactly. And now let's take a look at this from an organizational perspective, right? Because formative feedback is not simply something that we use to shape instruction and our learning. For us as an organization, are we meeting our objectives? Are we doing the things that we set out to do? Well, do we have a system in place that we can use to get feedback on those things? Are we keeping track of student enrollment? If we're trying to have an impact in a certain community, do we have some kind of system or target that we're going to use to measure the impact that we're having there? And if so, how often are we checking? How often are we assessing? Not just did we hit our target numbers, but if we're continually hitting our target numbers and this is way too easy, our goal is not in line with what we're trying to do. Or if we're never hitting them, maybe we have instead need to shift our focus and do more of a systems based approach, right? uh, there are going to be summative assessments, right? I hate to say it, but every year when your organization files their taxes, and they're going to have to file taxes every year, that's going to be a summative assessment, right? Did you keep the books correctly? But we don't have to wait for the summative assessment that doesn't always provide the same level of feedback to use formative tools within our goal setting systems or systems objectives. That is, do we have a way that we can keep track of finances and keep a check on who's using our financial assets? You know, there's other things that we can do to use this kind of thinking both with our students and with our organization. Excuse me. Okay. So now, correcting course and intervention. Inevitably, you're going, whether you use a goal-based approach or a systems-oriented approach, no matter the kind of formative or summative assessment tools you use, you are going to fall short of your expectations sometimes. And one, I don't want to say there's nothing wrong with that, but it's to be expected. And instead of getting all in a tizzy and oh no, woe is us, what can we learn from this? So when we do need to correct course and intervene, whether it's with student educational tools or student learning, or whether it's within our own organization, the first thing we can do is a root cause analysis. A lot of organizations will use an approach called the 5 whys. Well, why did this happen? And as soon as you get an answer to that question, well, why did that happen? And you ask why 5 times until ideally you get to some trigger that was the root cause of the problem, where it went wrong, so you can address the intervention there. There are other tools out there. Different organizations are going to have different approaches. Just the root cause is real simple, real easy, and you can do it quick and easily with just a handful of staff members to figure out what went wrong. The other thing that I want to bring up is the idea of our intentions in correcting course and intervening both in student learning and in our own organizational objectives versus the incentives that we create. This comes up a little bit with the idea of grades. We give grades to show students and parents how well they're doing. Well, that's our intention, right? But our incentive, or that we've created for the students, is now get an A or you're going to get in trouble at home, or you're going to have a hard time getting into college. You're not going to get the job that you want, right? And so we create these incentives that then pervert the whole goal setting system in the first place, right? And the same can be true when we're trying to intervene, that we need to look at maybe our whole system created some incentives that didn't actually line up with what we were trying to accomplish. And so going back and doing that root cause analysis can help us figure out, well, why did the student do this? Why did the student cheat? Why did the student write their essay using an AI bot? Well, because we created a system where students want to get as good of a grade as possible while spending as little time doing it, because they have homework in 5 classes, they're playing sports, they're performing in some kind of musical organization, and they serve on the student council. Like, plus they want to have some kind of social life, and they were doing all of these things to try to get into this great school, right? We've created those incentives that entice the student then to go and do this thing that we say, well, you should never do that. But we incentivized it, right? So a lot of times it's just undoing their own unintentional incentives, and trying to figure out a system that will actually work. So getting away again from the goals and the targets and looking more at process as a whole. What actually causes learning? Can we measure creativity? Can we measure things like grit? Absolutely we can. And I'm not here to tell you exactly how to do that. There are some phenomenal organizations out there that are doing really, really innovative and creative things in this space. But more importantly, you can be an innovative organization that's finding phenomenal ways to measure a student's level of determination or stick-to-itiveness, or any of these other things that we might feel are intangibles, but are really the best indicators of long-term student learning.
This has been so informative. Oh, this has been so informative. I have learned a ton about assessment and goal setting, and really that idea of process over product, creating processes that are sustainable and create habits that will propel you forward versus a goal that once you complete it is kind of done and you move on or don't move on, as the case may be. So I really appreciate your time, Tom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. And this is just the beginning. We're going to go deeper into this throughout this module.
Wonderful. Well, we'll see everybody in the next portion.
Thanks.